What if one small container could keep producing food for years without forcing you to start over every season? Most gardeners are trapped in the same cycle. Buy seeds, grow the plants, harvest everything, pull the containers apart, and repeat the entire process next year. But perennial vegetables can change that. Some return from their roots. Others multiply through bulbs, crowns, or runners. And a few can actually drop their own seeds and create new plants right inside the same container. That means your pot can slowly become a self-renewing food system instead of a temporary garden. Today, we're counting down 7 perennial vegetables that can reseed or regenerate themselves and are especially interesting for container gardeners. The goal isn't simply to find plants that survive for a long time. We're looking for crops that can keep producing while giving you a natural way to continue the cycle. And we're starting with a leafy green that looks familiar, grows aggressively, and has a clever trick. If you stop harvesting it at the right moment, it can help plant the next generation for you. At number 7, Perennial Arugula, also known as wild rocket. Unlike the delicate annual arugula commonly grown for salads, wild rocket is a tougher perennial that can return year after year in suitable conditions. It produces deeply divided leaves with a stronger peppery flavor, and once established, it can keep supplying fresh greens without requiring you to start from seed every spring. The real reason it belongs on this list is its ability to reseed itself. Instead of pulling the plant out when it begins flowering, leave a few of your strongest plants alone. They will produce flowers, followed by seed pods. Allow some of those pods to mature and drop their seeds naturally into the container, and new seedlings can appear around the established plants. You can also collect the seeds and scatter them yourself. For container growing, a 3 to 5 gallon pot is plenty for a productive clump. Use loose, well-drained potting mix and place it somewhere with good sunlight. Direct sow the tiny seeds on the surface or barely cover them with fine soil, then keep the top layer consistently moist until germination. Because the seeds are small, avoid strong watering that can wash them away. Once established, harvest the larger outer leaves while leaving the center growing point intact. This allows the plant to continue producing instead of being repeatedly cut down. And here's the important trade-off. If you want a self-renewing container, don't harvest every plant. Leave a few to flower and set seed. You're sacrificing some leaves today to create new plants for future harvests. The biggest mistake is treating flowering as failure. For annual arugula, bolting often means the harvest window is ending. With wild rocket, flowering can be part of your long-term strategy. Heat can still make the leaves stronger and encourage flowering, so during very hot weather, keep the soil consistently moist and provide some afternoon protection. Over time, the container can develop its own cycle. Mature plants produce leaves, selected plants produce seeds. Seeds create new seedlings, and the strongest plants remain for the next season. That's what makes wild rocket such an interesting starting point for this list. You're not simply growing a salad green. You're building a container that can help reproduce its own food supply. At number 6, French sorrel. If you want a perennial vegetable that feels almost like having a permanent salad garden in one container, French sorrel is hard to ignore. Unlike lettuce or spinach, which eventually finish their season and need to be replanted, French sorrel can return from the same root system year after year. Its bright green leaves have a distinctive, lemony, slightly sour flavor that can completely change an ordinary salad, soup, or sauce. French sorrel is also an excellent container plant because it doesn't need a huge amount of space. A 3 to 5 gallon container is enough to establish a productive clump, and a wider pot can allow the plant to gradually fill out. Use rich but well-drained potting mix and position the container where it receives several hours of sunlight. In hotter climates, some afternoon shade can help keep the leaves tender and reduce stress. You can start sorrel from seed, but once established, the plant becomes much easier to maintain. Keep the soil evenly moist during the early stages, then harvest the larger outer leaves while allowing the central leaves to continue growing. Don't strip the entire plant at once. Regular light harvesting encourages fresh growth and gives you a continuous supply of leaves throughout the growing season. What makes sorrel particularly interesting for this list is its ability to reproduce naturally through both its established root system and seeds. If you allow some plants to mature and flower, they can produce seeds that may fall around the mother plant and create new seedlings. You don't have to rely entirely on this process, but allowing a few plants to complete their reproductive cycle can gradually create a more self-sustaining container. The biggest mistake is harvesting everything before the plant has a chance to reproduce. If every flower is removed and every leaf is harvested, you're treating a perennial like an annual. Instead, think in cycles. Keep the strongest plant as your permanent foundation, harvest from it regularly, and occasionally allow part of the plant to flower and produce seed. Another advantage is that French sorrel handles cooler weather well. As summer fades and temperatures become milder, the leaves can become especially attractive for fall cooking. In colder climates, the foliage may slow or disappear during winter, but the established root system can return when conditions improve. And that's the real value of French sorrel. You don't need to clear the container and start over every spring. One healthy plant can become a long-term source of fresh, distinctive greens, while occasional reseeding gives you the possibility of new plants appearing naturally. For gardeners trying to build a low-maintenance perennial container garden, sorrel is the kind of crop that quietly keeps giving. At number 5, Egyptian walking onion. This may be one of the most fascinating plants on the entire list because it doesn't just survive for years. It has a built-in way of planting its own replacements. Instead of producing ordinary flowers and relying entirely on seeds, Egyptian walking onion develops clusters of small bulbils at the top of its flowering stalk. Eventually, those little bulbs become heavy enough to bend the stalk towards the ground, where they can root and grow into new onion plants. That's where the name walking onion comes from. This makes it almost perfect for a long-term container garden. Start with a 5-gallon container filled with loose, well-drained soil. Plant the bulbs a few inches apart and keep the soil moderately moist while they're establishing. Give the container plenty of sunlight because strong light helps the plants develop healthy leaves and mature bulbils. Once established, the plant becomes remarkably low maintenance. You can harvest the green leaves whenever you need fresh onion flavor, but the real show begins when the mature stalks produce their bulbils. Instead of cutting every stalk before it develops these clusters, leave some of the strongest plants untouched. As the bulbils mature, the stalks bend outward and eventually touch the soil. When conditions are right, the small bulbs can take root and establish new plants. You can also speed up the process yourself. Harvest the bulbils when they're mature and plant them directly into the same container or another pot. This gives you control over where the next generation grows rather than simply letting every bulb fall wherever it wants. The biggest mistake is treating every flower stalk as something that should be removed. With many onions, gardeners cut flower stalks because bolting can reduce bulb quality. Egyptian walking onion is different. Those stalks are exactly what you want if your goal is natural reproduction. The bulbils are part of the plant's survival strategy, and removing them prevents the container from renewing itself. Another advantage is that you don't need to harvest the entire plant. Take only what you need, leave the underground bulbs established, and allow the plant to continue producing. Over time, one container can develop into a dense colony of interconnected generations. This is what makes Egyptian walking onion such a strong number 5. It's more than a perennial vegetable, it's a vegetable with a built-in propagation system. You plant it once, harvest the greens and young bulbs, allow some bulbils to fall, and those tiny replacements can become the next generation. Instead of buying onion sets every year, your container can gradually learn how to reproduce itself. And when a plant can literally drop its own replacements onto the soil, you start to see what a truly self-renewing container garden can look like. At number 4, Welsh Onion, also known as bunching onion. If you want a perennial onion that you can keep harvesting without pulling the entire plant out, this is one of the most useful choices for a container garden. Unlike ordinary bulb onions that are planted, harvested, and replaced, Welsh onions form permanent clumps. You can cut the green leaves for cooking, leave the roots in place, and the plant simply continues producing new growth. Over time, a planting can become a much larger cluster. This makes Welsh onion extremely well suited to containers. You don't need a massive pot. A 3 to 5 gallon container is enough to establish a productive clump, and a wider rectangular planter can hold several plants together. Use loose, well-drained potting mix and place the container where it receives several hours of sunlight. Start with seeds, divisions, or young plants. Then keep the soil consistently moist while the roots establish. The biggest advantage comes from the way you harvest. Instead of pulling the entire plant, simply cut the green leaves a few inches above the soil. The underground base remains alive, and new leaves will emerge from the center. You can repeat this process again and again throughout the growing season. As the clump becomes larger, you can also divide it and move sections into another container, creating new plants without buying more seed. Welsh onion can also produce flowers and seeds when mature. If your goal is a self-renewing garden, don't cut every flowering stalk. Leave some of the strongest plants to bloom, then allow the seeds to mature. You can collect those seeds yourself or let some fall naturally into the container. This gives you 2 forms of renewal. The original clump continues growing from its roots, while new plants can be created from seed. The biggest mistake is harvesting too aggressively. If you repeatedly cut every leaf down to the base, the plant has less leaf area available to rebuild its energy reserves. Instead, harvest selectively and always leave enough healthy green growth for the plant to recover. Consistent moisture is also important, especially when the container is exposed to hot summer conditions. And that's why Welsh onion earns the number 4 spot. It isn't necessarily the most dramatic vegetable on this list, but it may be one of the most practical. You can walk outside, cut exactly what you need for dinner, and leave the rest of the plant growing. The same container can continue producing season after season, while mature plants can be divided or allowed to produce seeds. For a small space gardener, that's an incredibly efficient system. One container becomes a permanent source of fresh onion flavor instead of another crop you have to completely replant every year. Plant it once, harvest carefully, divide when necessary, and let the strongest plants continue the cycle. At number 3, New Zealand spinach. Despite the name, this isn't true spinach at all. It's a different leafy green with a major advantage. It handles heat much better than ordinary spinach. That makes it especially valuable for gardeners who want a crop that can survive through conditions that would cause traditional spinach to bolt. And when you allow mature plants to flower and drop their seeds, New Zealand spinach can help create new plants for the next growing season. This is where it becomes especially interesting for a self-renewing container garden. New Zealand spinach is often grown as an annual, but in warm climates it can behave like a perennial, while in cooler areas it can reseed itself and return when conditions become favorable. That means you don't always have to depend on buying and planting new seed every season. For containers, give it room to spread. A 5-gallon container can support a productive plant, but a wider fabric grow bag or rectangular planter can be even better because the stems naturally spread outward. Use rich, well-drained potting mix and place the container in a sunny location. Unlike many cool-season greens, New Zealand spinach can handle considerable sunlight and warmth once established. Direct sowing works well because the seeds are relatively large and the plants don't appreciate unnecessary root disturbance. Soak the seeds beforehand to help soften their hard outer coating, then plant them roughly 1/2 to 1 inch deep in moist soil. Keep the container consistently watered while the seedlings establish. Once the plants begin producing, harvest the tender growing tips rather than stripping every leaf from the plant. Regular harvesting encourages branching and can turn one plant into a surprisingly large supply of greens. The leaves work well in stir-fries, soups, curries, and cooked dishes where ordinary spinach would normally be used. The important part of the self-renewing strategy comes later. If you want the container to produce its own next generation, allow some mature stems to flower and form seed. Don't harvest everything. Let a few strong branches complete their life cycle, then allow the seeds to mature and fall into the container. In suitable climates, new seedlings may appear naturally when conditions become favorable. The biggest mistake is removing every mature plant at the end of the season. If you want a self-seeding system, you need to leave enough plants to produce seed. You should also remember that natural reseeding isn't guaranteed in every climate or container. Extreme cold can kill the parent plants and prevent seeds from surviving, so gardeners in colder regions may want to collect some mature seed and store it for the following season. And that's what makes New Zealand spinach such an interesting number 3. It gives you something ordinary spinach struggles to provide: resilience through heat, a long harvesting window, and the possibility of creating its own replacements. Instead of planting once and immediately starting over, you can allow a few plants to complete their natural cycle while continuing to harvest from the rest. Over time, that combination can turn a simple container into a recurring source of fresh greens. You harvest the growing tips, leave a few plants to flower, collect or allow the seeds to fall, and then start the cycle again when the next growing season arrives. For gardeners looking to reduce yearly replanting, that's a pretty powerful advantage from one small pot. At number 2, Good King Henry. If you've never heard of this plant before, that's exactly why it deserves a place near the top of this list. Good King Henry is an old perennial vegetable that was once valued as a reliable leafy green long before modern supermarkets made spinach available year-round. It looks modest, but its biggest advantage is longevity. Once established, the plant can return from the same root system for years, while mature plants can also produce seeds that help create new generations. For container gardeners, this is particularly interesting because Good King Henry doesn't require you to dedicate an enormous amount of space to it. A 5-gallon container can support a mature plant, although a wider pot will allow the root system and surrounding plants more room. Use rich, well-drained potting mix and place the container where it receives good sunlight with some protection from extreme afternoon heat. Good King Henry is usually grown from seed or young plants, but patience is important. The seeds can be slower to germinate than common salad greens, and the plant takes time to become fully established. That's actually part of the reason it's valuable as a perennial. You're not growing it for an instant harvest. You're building a permanent leafy green plant that can become more productive as the years pass. Once established, harvest the young leaves and tender shoots rather than stripping the entire plant. The leaves can be cooked much like spinach, while young flowering shoots can also be used as a vegetable. Leave enough foliage behind so the plant can continue feeding its root system and return strongly in the following season. The self-renewing part comes when you allow some mature plants to flower. Instead of cutting every flower stalk, leave a few strong plants untouched. Once the flowers mature, seeds can develop and eventually fall around the parent plant. You can allow some seeds to remain in the container or collect them for controlled propagation. This gives you a backup generation while the original plant continues living underground. The biggest mistake is expecting Good King Henry to behave like lettuce. It is slow, deliberate, and designed for longevity rather than speed. Over-harvesting a young plant can weaken it before its root system has become established. Give it time during the first season, harvest lightly, and think of that first year as an investment. Once the plant is established, however, the relationship changes. Instead of repeatedly buying seeds and starting new containers, you have a permanent source of greens that can return each year. And if the plant is allowed to reproduce, you may eventually have both the original plants and new seedlings appearing around them. That's what makes Good King Henry the perfect number 2. It combines history, longevity, and natural regeneration in a crop most modern gardeners have forgotten. It may not grow as quickly as arugula or produce as dramatically as an onion, but its real value is measured in years rather than weeks. And at number 1, asparagus. If this entire list is about building a container garden that doesn't need to be restarted every year, asparagus is almost impossible to ignore. This isn't a crop you plant for one season and replace. Under the right conditions, an established asparagus crown can remain productive for 15 to 20 years or more. You're essentially turning one container into a long-term food investment. The first thing to understand is that asparagus needs more space than most plants on this list. For container growing, choose a large 15 to 20-gallon container, preferably one that's deep enough to accommodate the developing crown and extensive roots. A large fabric grow bag can also work, provided it drains extremely well. Use a fertile, loose growing medium because asparagus dislikes waterlogged roots and needs room to establish. Starting from one-year-old crowns is usually faster than growing from seed. Plant the crown according to the variety's recommended depth, spread the roots carefully, and cover it with loose soil. During the establishment period, resist the temptation to harvest heavily. This is one of the most important rules with asparagus. The plant needs time to build a strong root system before you begin taking significant harvests. Once mature, asparagus produces edible spears in spring. Harvest only young, firm spears for a limited period, then allow the remaining shoots to grow into tall, fern-like foliage. Those ferns aren't wasted. They're essentially the plant's solar panels, collecting energy and sending it back down to the crown to prepare for future seasons. And this is where the self-renewing story becomes fascinating. If you grow both male and female plants can produce small red berries containing seeds. Allow some mature plants to complete their natural cycle, and those seeds can potentially create new asparagus plants. In a container, you may prefer to collect the seeds yourself and start new plants separately, because allowing seedlings to grow randomly can overcrowd the original crown. The biggest mistake is harvesting too much too soon. Asparagus rewards patience. A weak crown produces weak spears, while a well-established crown can continue returning season after season. Protect the container from prolonged freezing temperatures, maintain good drainage, and feed the plant appropriately after the harvest period so it can rebuild its reserves. The payoff is completely different from an annual vegetable. Imagine planting asparagus today and still harvesting from that same original crown many years from now. Instead of purchasing seeds every spring, preparing new containers, and waiting for another crop to mature, you're maintaining an established perennial food source. That's why asparagus earns the #1 position. It represents the ultimate idea behind this entire list. Don't just grow a crop, build an asset. One container, one healthy crown, years of care, and potentially decades of harvest. For a gardener with limited space, that kind of long-term productivity is incredibly valuable. The most interesting thing about perennial vegetables isn't simply that they live longer. It's that they change the way you think about gardening. With annual crops, the season ends and the process starts over. With perennial crops, the garden becomes a continuing system. Roots survive, plants regrow, clumps divide, seeds fall, bulbils develop, and new generations can appear without you constantly starting from zero. And that's exactly what these 7 plants can offer. Perennial Arugula can reseed itself, French Sorrel can return from established roots, Egyptian Onion can produce its own bulbils, Welsh Onion can keep rebuilding from permanent clumps, New Zealand Spinach can reseed under favorable conditions, Good King Henry can remain productive for years, and asparagus can turn a single large container into a long-term food investment. Of course, self-seeding isn't guaranteed in every climate, and container plants need more protection from extreme heat and cold than plants growing in the ground. But with the right container, good drainage, and a little patience, you can create something much more valuable than a seasonal garden. You can create a garden that keeps rebuilding itself, and sometimes the smartest vegetable garden isn't the one where you plant the most.